Hi, good morning again. As you know, the Caribbean Telecommunications Union had been asked by the CARICOM Secretariat to shepherd the whole process of internet governance on behalf of the Caribbean, and we've been doing that since 2005. What do I do here? Is it just... So we've been in this business for 15 years, and we have some concerns, and we have been giving very serious thought to how we could make this a sustainable, enduring process that keeps delivering the benefits of the internet to the wider Caribbean community. And so just by way of a history of some of the work that we've done over these 15 years. We've done, of course, this is the 15th edition of the Caribbean Internet Governance Forum. We've had over the period 4 Caribbean ministerial seminars on internet governance, because we recognize that governments do not see themselves as a stakeholder in this process. And as more and more government services go online, as they develop their internet economies, it is imperative that they see themselves as a stakeholder in this process. So from time to time, we have been reaching out to our government agencies and policymakers and advising them that they need to be part of the process. We've had, in addition to the annual Internet Governance Forum, we've had 23 Internet Governance sessions in a number of our other fora in 18 Caribbean countries. We were joint hosts of the South School on Internet Governance. I think it was in 2014, South School on Internet Governance. We have done 6 workshops on internet governance, technical and policy issues. We have an online Caribbean Internet Governance Forum, and I would really like to encourage all of you to be part of the discussion forum. It should be up and running. Online discussion forum. When we first launched that discussion forum, 3 people used to participate, which certainly not representative of the Caribbean. Deidre, you're one of them. All sorts of things.
It's been a while though, and with the change of the website now, we would
have to get that
running.
Up and running again. But it's important. We have to make use of the technology. And at that time, I don't think there was such a culture of online collaboration. So it's 15 years hence. So I'm hoping that all of you now would be willing to take part in the online discussion forum. Yes, we have a harmonized Caribbean Internet Governance Policy Framework. We've been working on that. The 3rd issue, I tell you, it was a shock for me yesterday when we started looking at the vision and the comments that came back. And I thought to myself, that would have been an easy thing. But then I realized we wrote that vision 15 years ago, and there's about 12, yeah. But still, it just shocked me that we had. We've done one of the early strategic thrusts of the policy framework was critical internet infrastructure. And we did with Packet Clearing House a lot of work in terms of raising awareness and educating on internet exchange points. We actually did 18 internet exchange points workshops in 14 Caribbean countries, and we're continuing with that. The French countries have asked us to come and help them. We are still working on IPv6, promoting it and encouraging organizations to adopt IPv6. The indigenous content creation, and I've heard some comments on that. That is an issue. We have such rich content within the Caribbean, but as to why we have not been able to package it or have compelling packaging, or I don't know what it is. We keep taking this stuff from the north, which isn't necessarily the best thing for us. And the other area that we're looking at are new business models for the internet economy. And we're working with the CBU and the broadcasters to have this sort of getting people to understand that business is no longer what it was 50 years ago. It's not necessarily the bricks and mortar. You have the technology now to expose your business to a global market. And one of the things I mentioned to my staff, there's this website called, I think it's Fiverr. I don't know if they call it Fiverr. Yeah. And even for our small business people, you have to have a brand of excellence because you're not competing with your neighbor down the road. You are competing with a global market. Yes, and it's very important. We have to instruct them, what the product has to be excellent. Yes, you may get away with some mediocre stuff here locally, but not if you're going to be able to compete at an international level. So we have been pushing the whole issue of new business models for the internet economy. And over the 15 years, we have had some solid accomplishments and achievements. You will recall part of the capacity building was closely associated with our Caribbean ICT Roadshow. And traveling with the roadshow were ARIN and LACNIC and ISOC and ICANN, all of the many global organizations, which were able to build relationships with stakeholders in the countries that they visited with us. And among the citizenry, there's a greater awareness and understanding of internet governance issues. There's a greater degree of engagement of ICT stakeholders, an increasing awareness of and participation in global internet organizations and fora, because we had ARIN there and they could talk about what they were doing. Stakeholders were now encouraged to go to the ARIN meetings and go to the ICANN meetings and go to the IGF meetings. So that we saw over the course of the years from 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 to 10 and 15 and 20 Caribbean people at international fora on internet governance. Of course, we spoke about the improvement in the critical physical internet infrastructure. We have about 12 or 14 IXPs across the region as a direct result of the work that came out of the Caribbean Internet Governance Forum. And of course, IPv6 awareness and adoption. We did a lot of preaching about it. This is not an option. You have to go IPv6. And so this slide just attempts to put the mechanism of how the Caribbean internet governance worked. So there was a CTU, and the CTU would mobilize the stakeholders. We kept in touch. Nigel spoke about it. We have a database of Caribbean internet governance stakeholders. We would convene the IGF, and then out of the conversations that we're having today, we are actually formulating the policy framework that would guide us in the formulation and implementation of projects to satisfy this Internet Governance Forum. So when you do that, when the forum completes that policy framework, the CTU now will look and see what projects we could institute to implement them. And we have quite a track record of implementation of projects that have redound to the benefit of Caribbean citizens and stakeholders. So some of the challenges we've seen, and these challenges still persist, is that there's insufficient attention to and visibility of internet governance fora of issues at the national and governmental levels. And I said at the beginning, we have been very concerned that the governments do not see themselves as being part of that group of stakeholders that would drive this internet governance forum. And then even at the national level, I suppose people are still at the stage, if we ask about internet governance, it's internet, what is that? So there's a lot more work to be done to raise the visibility of internet governance at the national level. Now, so the CTU does a lot of work at the regional level. So we have the policies, but there are no structures on the ground to take those regional perspectives and customize them and embed them in what's happening nationally. So there's a limited, unless the CTU goes and works in the country, this was the situation. There was no one to do the work, right? And now we have national IGFs, and we have been actively promoting the establishment of national IGFs. We have Barbados represented here, Trinidad and Tobago, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I think there's a national IGF in Belize as well. But those structures are very important because it now enables that higher level regional approach to be embedded and within the national IGF framework. And of course, it works both ways. So now there's a structure on the ground in each country that would enable the concerns of that country to be raised to a regional level. So it works both ways. And then the other thing was the lack of capacity or organization nationally to benefit fully from the CIGF and to address the national issues. Well, those two are related. And then we found in some of the countries really limited skills and weak pathways for advocacy on internet governance issues. So if you had a national IGF too, if the government is not a stakeholder, what is the avenue by which you get what is the avenue by which the things that need to be done are raised to the level of the government? The governments need to be at that table because the governments have a capacity to enable certain things or facilitate things to happen. And even in our work with the internet governance for the internet exchange points, just the government minister standing up and saying, we need to have an internet exchange point in this country. Just that sort of declaration made the work so much easier because the private sector is looking at the government and saying, oh, yes, they're going, yes, we have to move on this. You see, so the governments need to be at the table as well. But people, a national body, if you don't have the right people, it's very difficult to get that engagement and push and assistance and support that the government must necessarily provide. So governments, I go back, governments have to be part of that stakeholder grouping, that national grouping, and they have to support the process as well. They're not, mind you, I'm not saying they take over, but supporting a process, right? Okay, and then I mentioned, of course, that disconnect between the regional and national initiatives. Then insufficient capacity or persons working in the area to request to represent their countries at international internet forum. And of course, there's a multiplicity of uncoordinated interventions. It's a scattershot approach because there's no central coordination. So that different organizations, they recognize that training is needed in this and they do the training here. Somebody jumps up, training is needed in this and they do the same training in another, what we need is some facility to coordinate all of these training and other interventions. And more than that, it shouldn't just be training for the sake of training. Because I could tell you, and I'm just saying it, I have been to training courses and the training courses were excellent. 2 weeks later, ask me what it's about and I could barely remember, right? So it can't be just training to say, well, I've trained 10 people in this and that. It has to be training with a view to implementing something. So if you're doing IPv6 training with a group of private sector organizations, the goal must be when you finish this training, you are going to make your company IPv6, right? That there must be a project associated with that training. There must be a vision for even doing that training. And if we did it in this way, that you have a project, so you get together all your governmental, your ministry, IT managers. I am doing some IPv6 training for the IT managers in this government. And at the end of it, the project is IPv6 adoption across the government. And that is how you see progress. Not training for the sake of training, right? But training with a view to doing something with it. Right. So those are some of the things that we have observed, some of the challenges of how things currently work in the internet governance framework. So right now, where did the arrow go? Right. So this picture, it represents how things work at this point in time and what we need to move to, what we are suggesting that we move to. So right now we're looking at the from. The CTU pretty much does everything. We do the consultations, we do the mobilization, we do the capacity building, the planning, the executing, the everything. But it's based on what this group of this Caribbean Internet Governance Forum says. So we are really the implementing or executing arm for the Caribbean Internet Governance Forum. What we would like to do is actually, what we have done, I should say, is establish a Caribbean Internet Development Foundation. And you'd see it has taken the place of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. And the Caribbean Telecommunications Union becomes a stakeholder like everybody else, right? We will join the group of stakeholders, not pushing, not doing everything, but now you have this Caribbean Internet Development Foundation that is going to work with the CIGF and the national CIGFs to do all of those things, because ideally, the work of consultation, mobilization, planning, capacity building, executing, all of that, that is the work of the national IGF. It can't be that the CTU is trying to work in these 20 countries. So we are encouraging the development of national IGFs who do that work on the ground and feed up to the Caribbean Internet Governance. Caribbean Internet Development Foundation is a two-way street. And each NIGF now has at its disposal the support of that regional organization. The foundation would be able to get from the national IGFs what their needs are, what they're focusing on, what training they need. And the foundation supports them in the execution of the Caribbean, of the Internet Governance Agenda program. So this is a closer look, a little more detailed. We have the globe there. So the Caribbean Internet Development Foundation, it works with the global internet governance community. As you can see, the CTU is a stakeholder, the governments are stakeholders, private sector stakeholders, academia, the technical community, and I'm talking about the RNs, the ISOC, the ICANN, the LACNIC, the Facebook, the Google, the whoever else, and of course, civil society and others. We can't capture everybody here, but everybody is in there somewhere. And yeah? And the foundation now takes on this role of coordination. So all of those, for example, the technical community, their work can be coordinated so that it's not 10 different people doing IPv6, right? It's you do IPv6, and then we could do DNSSEC, and then we could do this. And so there's a progression of building on the work of what the other people have done, right? And that is the way we will make progress. So the Caribbean Internet Development Foundation, it will do coordination of the program, education, right? We talked about the training. It will do the planning and the implementation. And we are hoping things, and there you see the CIGF would be one of the things, one of the vehicles that they will convene, one of the activities that they do. If I'm not mistaken, I had a discussion with Bevel Wooding, and he's saying it would be great to have the Caribbean Internet Development Foundation take over the running of Caribnog. Yes, and getting Caribnog going, and you're coordinating all of these activities in a way that is logical, in a way that fosters meaningful progression and development. So you don't have this sort of scattershot approach, things happening all over the place with no relationship to each other. Sorry? And lots and lots of duplication. Thank you very much. Good. Right. So that's it. So, and we've put in some roles of the national IGF, some of their activities, the consultation, the planning, the capacity building. Those are the things we've been trying to do, the CTU, but we can't do it in 20 countries. That's a lot of work. That is really the responsibility of a national IGF. And of course, all of the stakeholders and things, we would want the foundation to do things like research, gathering statistics on the internet society, on the internet economy. You know how hard it is to get information out of the Caribbean. And we wanted the foundation to run a competition, for example, IPv6 country, nation, IPv6 Caribbean, so that there's somebody who is looking at the whole picture on a consistent basis. The CTU, while we've been happy to do it, we really think this is going beyond what we can reasonably handle, and therefore we believe that the Caribbean Internet Development Foundation is the way to go. I thank you.
Well, I guess the question would be, and since there was a space for, if we bring back up this slide. Yeah, since there's a space and a role for all those players in the development foundation, and do we have representatives from private sector, academia, technical community, civil society here? The question would be, do you think that this is an idea you can support? And would you be willing to put some resources into such a foundation? I'm willing to hear some comments from the room in this regard. Rodney?
Thank you. I just have a comment in terms of resources, certainly not financial resources. I can't speak on behalf of the government of Barbados, but if I were to provide policy advice to the government of Barbados, I would certainly recommend supporting this proposed foundation. What I observe, though, in terms of the linkage to the global IGF, which I think is a very important forum, even though I know sometimes the discussions there can be a bit esoteric and beyond what we are dealing with in the region, I think it's still important for us to understand that everything we're doing here should feed into that process as well. And it should be very clear linkages to that global discussion.
Mm.
And of course, it should also support policy advice and development for the governments who go and sit and represent their respective countries in organizations such as ICANN. I know Albert's has been doing a lot of work to get the countries represented, but we need now to take it to the next step to ensure that they participate and are fully engaged. So when they go, they know what the issues are, and more importantly, they know what they want to put on the table on behalf of the region. Thank you.
Let me add in terms of being able to generate revenue for that, because regardless of what you do, you have to pay for it.
Yep.
All right. So all the discussions leads to, well, the reason why government don't like to participate because you're going to ask them for money. That's the reason why.
Well, if government wants to benefit,
Well, the thing about it is when we benefit, the government benefit because the government represents you.
Yes.
So what I'm saying here is this. I mean, I operate in Wall Street, but I'm from Trinidad originally. I left here about, in the 1980s. And going around the world and implementing these type of things, the easiest way is through the creative economy.
Economy.
The creative economy is worth $2.3 trillion. Okay? And you'll find that places like in the developing world, like Brazil, all of Africa, the way they're able to fund these things is by doing exactly what we do in Trinidad. They put on festivals. Reggae was just added by UNESCO as a protective creative resource. Okay? That translates to money because the easiest way to get these things funded is when you become an implementation partner to the World Trade Organization GATS program, because that's the most important program for developing countries. We are not big manufacturers like China. So what we have is exactly what CTU is all about. You are a service. And by virtue of that service, there's no limit as to the amount of money you can generate. But you have to become an implementation partner. You can't operate based on the technicality of what you do because nobody understands that. You have the TOP, the MOP, and the BOP, the bottom of the pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid is the informal economy. If you look at the Caribbean countries and you look at the African countries, they're generally the same. You have a huge BOP who are the biggest users of what you're producing. And the informal economy represents a lot of the GATS. We sign those agreements, but we just don't implement them. The minute you become an implementation partner for what they already signed, you are the government in terms of being a partner to the government. And by doing that, I'll be glad to show you how it works in other countries because that's the job I do. And I think it's important that when we look at these type of plans, the job aspect of it, which is based on goal number 8, okay, of the UN SDGs, you also become an implementation partner for the UN SDGs. Under the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, that's advocacy. There's advocacy budgets. Everything we're doing here fits under the advocacy budget. So therefore, if we become implementation partners, remember, they're having the same challenges that you're having. They want a partner like you to implement their policies and practices. But because we don't sit in the same room, they don't even know you exist. So once they're aware that you're an implementation partner under the UN SDG number 17, then the money that they have allocated for them, they're much higher than you in terms of the food chain. So the higher up you go in the food chain, the more important you become. You're too low down. You have to elevate yourself to become an implementation partner. In that way, you change CTU from cost-oriented to revenue-oriented. That's the basic problem. And the SRI funds, which are the socially responsible investment funds, there's about $3 trillion sitting on Wall Street waiting for projects that are SRI projects. So you have to make yourself into the projects that is being sought after by investment funds.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yes, Mr.
Yes,
Duncan.
please,
So we are taking you up on your offer to show us how, because clearly that is certainly not one of the skills we have in our basket of competencies. So we will be depending on you to work with us.
I'll be glad to, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's based on relationship equity. You invest in relationships. And when those relationships actually bear a dividend, then that's the benefit you need. But at the end of the day, those people who need you the most are the ministries of trade and investment, because they are the revenue side of every government. You don't go on to the cost-oriented ministries because they don't want to see you. The people who want to see you, like tourism, sports, are the Ministry of Trade and Investment. They need you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for that. Like I said, make sure you have your email.
Right. My comment obviously is about the structure and the way things work, the process that you're going to go through. So basically, if we look at the diagram, we're looking at, you're creating pretty much a Caribbean multi-stakeholder advisory, a Caribbean MAG to convene the Caribbean Internet Governance Forum.
Foundation, right.
And also to lead, and well, there's a coordinating role there, except coordinate tends, especially when you have governments lined up with the coordinating role, that gives civil society a little tingle, and not a good one. Because coordinate tends to say, tell us what, make some rules there as to how, when, why, and what. And one major point of the multi-stakeholder movement and the internet and the way internet governance works is that everyone is equal in their own space and in their own way, but they have to be equal, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, the idea of putting governments in a coordinating role as opposed to the entire thing
is not really, It's not really.
It's just unfortunate that the coordinate was a blue. It has nothing. The coordinate is across the board, the whole thing. It's not that the government does coordination, the private sector does, and academia does the education. It's just unfortunate. The training by and the technical community, the planning, it doesn't work like, no, it's not matched up. These are just functions of the Caribbean Internet, the foundation. It isn't that those bodies are doing the coordination, education, planning, and it's not lined up like that at all. So and this is why we put it forward, because if you didn't tell me that, I would not have even seen it in the way you've interpreted it. Thank you.
Yeah. So the coordinate, educate, plan, implement is done by the foundation, which is comprised of all the stakeholders. So it is the multi-stakeholder group doing all of those things.
So basically, you're setting it up kind of like the CGI Brazil, but not convened by government.
But not what by government?
Convened by government, because CGI is convened by government, but it's the most effective one, makes money, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing too is that is a national one. How are a lot of the NIGFs have grown up already out of their own mechanism. We see that there is a space for someone to be, for the Caribbean MAG, for example, besides convening the Caribbean IGF, to be a clearing house for information and so on and so forth. But the idea of the coordination is a bit much, because those NRIs are national and they will do what is important to them and based on their stakeholders. So the top-down thing, but it's more like you need to do it more like a bottom-up thing, where the NRIs exist. They say, this is what we are working on. This is what's coming out of our stakeholders in our countries. They feed up. And the Caribbean MAG, well, the foundation, as you got, can pass that information around. It can act as a clearinghouse, library, a place for all this information to go from place to place, and it could send all this, make sure everybody understands what everyone else is doing, but still have a issue with that coordinating role. The idea beyond that of actually going forth on another arm and doing training and implementing projects is wonderful. If the Caribbean Internet Development Foundation has resources and funding and so on, which apparently you're going to have lots of funding, then an amazing thing. Excellent. Because right now, most of the NGOs that do work in these things we're getting funded from lovely people like LACNIC and ISOC and Google and so on. And they can't fund everything. So if we do, and they would still have to do that. And instead of saying that you implement all these things, you just do the same role of coordinating and making sure that everyone knows that the page that everyone else is on with regard to projects. Because what happens often is that a big national or regional thing happens and it kind of overwhelms the bottom-up work that's been going on. And it's people on the bottom who really know what the stakeholders see. These are the stakeholders. So it should really be the bottom-up filtering up and not the foundation doing stuff like that.
Right, and if you look at the NIGS, you see it's a two-way street, and I think I mentioned it. The intention isn't to impose, but you're gathering the information from your NIGS in terms of what are their needs, what they need to do, and you're supporting them in facilitating. Right? I hear you. I like some of the language you used earlier. Of course, I can't say, but I get this sense, that fear of the coordinated, it's not we're not imposing, yes, because we are taking the needs of the various NIGFs, and if 6 of them need training in GDPR, right, based on that information, we will now talk to Carlton and Bartlett and arrange and coordinate a training program for all of the NIGFs. You with me? It is not that we are going to be imposing the needs on the ground. At the end of the day, it's the people on the ground who will be doing the work. We get that information from them. With respect to this sustainability, right? One other, it's not represented here, but research, things like statistics, gathering of information, that has a value, right? So there are things that are not necessarily represented here that are designed to generate revenue. Yes?
There's just one other thing that you forgot. The IGFs don't, when the IGF was considered and when we came up with the idea, the IGF is a process of discussion and getting information, basically letting stakeholders say what their interests are with what their needs and ideas are with regard to policy. Most IGFs don't actually implement. So the idea of saying that those would do that, that you're saving us from having to do that, wouldn't necessarily be totally correct, because we don't do that. We do have members, mainly the civil society and the technical community, who do that as organizational members. And I think some of those details need to be really clear before you can start figuring out how a Caribbean foundation that helps and supports, you have to know where and how to help and support, to whom you need to direct the things. Because it may not be to the national MAG, it may be to a member of a section of one of the sectors of the MAG. So you may bypass the MAG entirely if it comes to implementing a project. Yeah.
Point taken. point taken, and that is where we will be dependent on the NIGFs to say who and what. Yes, I just want to make another point, and I think I had mentioned it earlier. When we established the Caribbean IGF in 2005, we said we were not just going to do the policy, right? We would find the means to implement, and the CTU has taken on that implementation role. And the thing about when Barbados established their national IGF, and I think I said the same thing with respect to Trinidad and Tobago, surely, yes, do the talking, do the discussion, get those conversations going. But at the end of the day, we don't want
something.
We want to have something to show. And that was a very conscious decision that we made at the start when we established the CIGF. We said we're not just going to be talking, but we actually have to implement things to advance this internet governance agenda, to bring benefits. Because if we sat in a room and just talked and talked and talked, we're not benefiting anybody. We're helping, yes, we have a better understanding, yes, and so on and so forth. We could talk at the global level, but at the end of the day, we have to effect change on the ground. And that has been that was, I think I mentioned it, that is what we said. We were just going to, the forum would have these discussions, but then there needed to be some movement, some movement towards changing things on the ground.
Which has been done by the CTU.
That's right.
And in the nationals, it's been done by the ISOC, the local ISOC chapters,
right.
other various NGO chapters, the universities that participate, the members of.
Right.
So that's what we need to separate the
okay.
IGF.
Yes, as opposed to the implementing.
Of the things that come out of the discussions
yes.
and so forth. There are people who write policy based on what happened, but that is not the IGF's job. Yes, it is somebody who was at the IGF, said, okay, this is what people think, this is what we should do, and they go off in a different place and do that implementation work, because we really don't want the IGF itself to start creeping away from exactly what it is into becoming an implementation or even a decision-making space, because it was very clear that it was not to be either of those things when we created it.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
They are reconsidering that all now. They are.